And welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer, joined by political director Rick Klein. Catherine Faulders, our White House reporter. Great to have you with us on this Thursday as we now say a final farewell to President 41, former President George Herbert Walker Bush, making his way right now, the casket and family on board a train. Live picture of the train, 4141, rumbling across Texas through what looks to be some rain showers there. There was a family funeral service this morning in Houston. Now on their way to the Bush Library, you can see in this live picture people turning out, some really stunning images of people paying their final respects across the state of Texas today. 1,000 people earlier today at that prayer service at the Episcopal Church, the family's Episcopal Church in Houston. And Rick, some interesting history here before we move on, and you are a student of it. Very few presidential funeral trains in American history, and this is one of them. Only 8 times has this happened. Abe Lincoln was the first.
Yeah, the tradition going back to Lincoln, and it's such a throwback. You'd think it would have happened more, particularly in the 19th century, but I think there's something so quaint and essentially American about the images that we're seeing there of the train and people turning out. We remember famous images like RFK's funeral casket moving in 1968, but it feels like a throwback of a week as well, because we're remembering a man who represented an era that could not feel further from the current era in politics. So in some way it feels like an appropriate conclusion as this rain rumbles through Texas.
Very well said. And that lead engine there, 4141, emblazoned in the colors of Air Force One, the blue and the white. As it makes its way. It will arrive just in a couple hours' time at the Bush Library in College Station, Texas, the former president's final resting place. There will be a private family ceremony there as he is interred next to his wife of 73 years, Barbara Pierce Bush. Much more on the Bush commemorations a little bit later in the show, but we want to lead off now with some big breaking news happening on the markets right now. Let's take a live look at what's going on Wall Street right now. The Dow, as of a few minutes ago, was down over 400 points. Looks to be making a little bit of a comeback here in the 200 range. But this on the heels of Tuesday's loss of 800 points. So we're at about 1,000 points so far this week. Let's bring in our chief business correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis. Rebecca, we're all watching our 401ks with great anxiety. It's the holidays. How concerned do we need to be right now? Give us some context about this situation.
Sure. So, Devin, a lot of this comes back to what's happening right now with China and U.S.-Chinese trade relations. And to put into context, especially what's happened in the last 24 hours, the CFO of Huawei, which is one of the largest smartphone makers in the world, was arrested overnight. Huawei, a Chinese company, one of the largest companies in China. And the question now is, in this delicate conversation that the United States has been a part of with China, really for many months now, but frankly, coming out of the G20 summit, President Trump's meeting with China's President Xi, it looked like coming out of that meeting, the White House was extremely optimistic about a deal. We had a 90-day tariff truce on the table. But in the last 48 hours between this arrest as well as some of the additional information that we've been getting from the White House, frankly, in the form of President Trump's own tweets, it's starting to look like that deal might be less likely. And as a result of that, you've seen the market really react. That's why we saw the 800-point sell-off earlier in the week, and today where we're seeing a bit of a sell-off. I would point, though, to the fact things have been coming back. There's still about 30 minutes left in the trading session today. And one of the things that's happening in the backdrop of this entire conversation is a question around the U.S. economy itself. How is the U.S. economy going to do next year? And if you look at most of the forecasts and the projections, things are really strong right now overall. If you look at the numbers, the unemployment rate near a 50-year low, you have wages rising, the holiday, you brought it up at the beginning of this segment, Devin, holiday sales figures have been coming in strong, but the question is this as good as it gets? Now, part of, you might call it optimism in the market right now. I wouldn't necessarily clarify it as that, but the fact of the matter is it was looking a lot more dire earlier in the session, and part of the reason that the market is down a little bit less right now, some might say, is because we're getting a jobs report tomorrow from the Bureau of Labor, as we do every month. And this one will look back on the month of November. And by most accounts, most forecasts expect that to be a relatively strong jobs report. So Wall Street investors, they don't want to go into a report like that might come out extremely positive, they wouldn't want to go into that extremely short because that could be really dangerous for them and their positions. But if you think about it from the standpoint of your own retirement savings, your nest egg, where we are right now, basically, is that 2018 is a wash, that all of that early optimism that started the year as far as the stock market is concerned, and we saw many days of ups and a number of record highs over the course of the year, most of that is now gone because of the activity that we've seen over the last 3 months in the market. And basically where that 401k, where that retirement account is today, is where it was at the end of 2017, Devin.
So you've sort of boosted our spirits here with some words of optimism about the strength of the economy. I mean, despite the losses you're talking about, you're sort of giving the advice of a good financial planner. Just stick it out. What goes down must come up. But I do want to ask you, Rebecca, I was sort of stunned coming out here. I just glanced on Twitter, saw a headline in Bloomberg, obviously the business news outlet. Their headline that they just posted, they said it's the worst time to make money in markets since 1972. Sort of a stunner. Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, I didn't see the exact article, so I'd have to look and see why they're saying that. But I think that the point here is as follows. This year, there have been these high-flying stocks that took us at the beginning of the year. All of these tech companies, the Apples, the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Facebooks of the world, they were the high flyers. They were flying high last year. This year, they were these top performers. And then all of a sudden, something changed. And part of that, again, has to do with China. These are all multinational companies. They make some of, or I should say most tech companies are multinational. Most American companies in the S&P 500 are major multinational companies, and they make some of their money from China. And the trade dispute, the more prolonged it becomes, the higher a cost it has on those businesses. It also creates uncertainty for those businesses going into 2019 when they think about how they're spending their money and where they're investing, when it's not clear whether there will or will not be tariffs on the table, whether there will or will not be an agreement. It makes it very difficult for companies to plan. The other thing that's happening in the backdrop here is that interest rates are rising. And we have now been in this environment of rock bottom interest rates for the last 10 years. So you could go out and get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage if you had really good credit for 3%. Well, that's just not possible anymore as interest rates go up. And the Fed has signaled that it will continue to hike interest rates going into next year. And that just means that the cost of borrowing becomes more expensive. And as the cost of borrowing becomes more expensive, businesses spend less money and consumers spend less money. And something that's really key for anybody who's watching this right now to think about is, even if you don't have any money in the stock market, you yourself are a very important part of what's happening in the U.S. economy right now, because as an American consumer, our spending, our behavior actually dictates about 70% of our overall economic growth, meaning how we behave if we choose to buy a car or a house, or we choose to shop big this holiday season, or we're not being fiscally responsible personally, that has a major impact on growth ahead too. And one of the questions is, as more and more people watch this market, even if they don't have money in it, does seeing the Dow drop create a sense of less confidence? And will that then translate into next year, spending less money, hence less growth?
All right, a lot to think about, Rebecca, on this day as we also look at our 401ks. And let's take another live look at the Dow before we let you go. It's down, bouncing back a little bit. It was down almost 500 points earlier. It's coming back up. That's a good sign after the 800-point loss on Tuesday. So we will hope for even a rosier picture tomorrow. Chief Business Correspondent Rebecca Jarvis, thank you so much, Rebecca, for your words of wisdom. And guys, you know, this issue of China is all of a sudden reared up its head at the end of the year. The president has been in a dance with China, Rick, since he became president, but it sort of came to a head after that G20 summit. Now it's really spooked the markets.
And it's interesting because the president said very little publicly this week. We spent so much time remembering George H.W. Bush, and he was there at the funeral service yesterday. But where he has commented, it seems to jolt the markets. And his optimism earlier in the week, he called himself tariff man at the beginning of the week, it seemed to have had an impact in the markets. And the president is not really tweeting much about the stock market gyrations of the last last couple of days, but that sort of played off in the background, and clearly a lot of investors and a lot of money managers have been watching.
I want to bring in someone now who is an informal outside advisor to President Trump on China, somebody that the president has called probably the leading authority on China. It's Michael Pillsbury, joins us now here in Washington. Michael, thank you so much for being on. You're a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, obviously also served in the first Bush administration. You are well regarded as an expert on China, familiar with their games. Give us your take on what the markets are trying to interpret right now, the mixed signals coming from this White House. Where do we stand in the truce that was announced just a few days ago in Argentina? Do you think it's real?
I think it is real. I'm much more optimistic than the market, obviously. There is the surprise of the arrest of Ms. Meng. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has just asked for an explanation and her immediate release. It's sort of a contradictory two demands that are, in some sense, asking to know the reason why she's been arrested is very legitimate. But Michael, I think this is a short-term problem.
Do you think that arrest of that executive that Rebecca Jarvis was just telling us about, do you think that's an accident, simply a coincidence that this is happening at a time when the president is doing this dance on tariffs, or do you think this is part of a coordinated strategy by the Trump administration to pinch the Chinese, both with tariffs and also some other tactics like this?
Well, I'm sure there's legal evidence that's going to be presented tomorrow at the bail hearing in Vancouver. But the more important point probably is there is a Trump administration strategy to put pressure on China so that the United States does not lose its technological lead in the world. It's pretty serious. President Obama started it with the indictment of the 5 hackers, you recall, who were hacking into Westinghouse and other companies, stealing trade secrets. There's a strong desire to stop this. The Chinese consenting to these talks and agreeing to the 90-day, what they call the roadmap, it's really very positive news. The relationship between President Xi and President Trump is what's crucial. They both effusively praise each other. The Chinese side has been saying for several months now that Trump is the smartest president they've ever dealt with. So I remain optimistic about the grand strategy working.
Michael Pillsbury, it's Rick Klein here. The president called himself a tariff man earlier in the week. What does that mean to you, and what does the message have to be to investors or consumers about the possibility, even the likelihood now, the inevitability of big tariffs, really taxes, being imposed on goods and services?
Well, I think the issue is how much pressure to put on China that actually works, so they can make calculations of the effects the tariffs will have in various levels of tariffs, what those tariffs will mean in terms of Chinese growth rate, Chinese losses. You know, they have a system of about 100 national champions. A national champions means a company that's supported by subsidies that the Chinese intelligence service will steal for it and bring it trade secrets. These national champions are what's at stake. And the Chinese don't like the tariffs because it affects these national champions. In fact, frankly, the American side has said these tariffs so far are punitive. They're not designed to protect American companies or industries. And so what's going to happen next is, as the talks unfold over the next 90 days, President Trump could, in fact, increase pressure. He can ask Ambassador Lighthizer to start hearings. Public hearings are required by law before tariffs are put on for another round of tariffs, much higher, covering many more products. On the other hand, to be positive, if the talks go well, the whole point is to have a ceasefire to reduce the tariffs. And both sides have been saying that their goal is zero tariffs and zero trade barriers. That's the ultimate goal here. So I don't understand this this kind of faint-heartedness of so many people in the stock market.
So let me ask you, Michael, go back to the truce that you have so much optimism in that bought the 90 days. One of the terms the White House, I was in Argentina with the White House on this one, they said in a statement that President Xi agreed to some unspecified amount of agriculture imports, auto imports, from the United States as part of this deal. Do you have any better sense of what the specifics are there? Did the U.S. get a significant concession from China here?
Well, there's two important points. One is President Trump has promised to give a press conference. He's delayed it out of respect for President Bush's funeral arrangements. And the other point is that the two sides have different versions in public of what they're saying happened at the dinner. And this is very understandable on the Chinese side. there is a power struggle going on over there. President Xi has had a number of people removed. He obviously wants to explain this in some sense, as you might say, sell it to his home front, and not just be caught flat-footed with his political enemies criticizing him for making too many concessions. So this President Trump's explanation and then President Xi's further explanation when he gets home, I think are going to calm things down considerably.
But how can there be an agreement if there's no paper to support it and both sides are talking totally differently about it?
Good question. That's the whole point of putting Ambassador Lighthizer in charge, trying to seek a detailed agreement that will have verification, it will be specific. This is what Ambassador Lighthizer and his team at the U.S. Trade Representative's office specializes in. And he was a genius with his negotiations with the Japanese in the 80s under President Reagan. So that's the whole point now. We have these vague descriptions on both sides of what they've agreed to. Ambassador Lighthizer is going to produce a written legal document. That'll be important.
And we know you'll be there all along the way, Michael Pillsbury at the Hudson Institute. We hope you'll come back here and help us interpret that document and the grand truce as it comes out. But thank you so much for coming on ABC News Live.
All
Michael.
I claim is to know Chinese.
Oh, okay, well, very good. That's more than I know, so thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Great to have him here. Meanwhile, guys, moving on, shifting gears a little bit, a major headline just a little while ago, the ABC News confirming and matching that the president is likely to name, Catherine Falders, you've done this reporting, a new attorney general, replacing the acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker. Tell us who it is.
Right. William Barr, also known as Bill Barr. He's the former attorney general under George H.W. Bush. And what we're hearing from our sources is that the president has told advisors that he intends to nominate him. We are expecting this to happen next week, but as you know, he can change his mind. Look.
And we're seeing a picture here of Bill Barr. He's the guy on the left sitting there in the Oval Office with the first President Bush, served 91 to 93. So this guy knows the job. He's done it.
He does. And I think, as we were all discussing earlier, he also has mildly criticized Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe. You remember when Jeff Sessions was forced out nearly a month ago, the main reason that the president never dropped this with Sessions was because he recused himself from that probe. So Barr has told the New York Times that there was more basis to investigate Hillary Clinton, for example, for the Uranium One deal than to investigate Trump for possible ties to Russia. That's something the president has to have in the back of his mind.
Bill Barr seems to be a pretty eminently confirmable figure. He is, in Washington circles, seen as a serious person. But also, sort of, as Catherine was saying, espouses the president's views on some of these controversial investigations.
Yeah, and he's also wrote an op-ed defending the president's decision to fire James Comey, saying that it was very defensible based on the facts that were there. Of course, Comey will be testifying before House Republicans behind closed doors just tomorrow. But I think you're exactly right. This is a lot of different direction than Matthew Whitaker, the current acting attorney general, would be. And we've seen the stories that have come out in the time that he's been serving in that job over the last month. That would have been a real struggle. And there are a lot of Hill Republicans that will be very comfortable, particularly in this week of remembrance around George H.W. Bush, to reach back into the past to find someone that definitely knows what he'd be doing in that job.
And so if Bill Barr is nominated and if Bill Barr goes through confirmation hearings before the Mueller probe is completed, he would oversee the Mueller investigation. Guys, let's turn to that. There are some big developments coming tomorrow in the Mueller investigation, which could give us a lot of information, Catherine. We expect the Mueller team to do some court filings that could reveal to us the direction of the investigation and just how cooperative some of President Trump's former associates have been.
So we learned about his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, who has been cooperating with Mueller for, I believe, over 70 hours. So his sentencing memo is due. They have to submit that, Mueller and prosecutors in New York, by 5 p.m. tomorrow. So that can detail the level of cooperation, what Cohen has been discussing with the special counsel, someone that the president says that he now wants his former attorney to go to prison for this. But the other big thing is the president's former campaign manager, campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. It was revealed that he was a cooperating witness. Those talks broke down. And Mueller says that he's lied about multiple topics. So the attorneys for Manafort claim that they don't know those lies, that those lies haven't been detailed to them. But tomorrow, the special counsel says that in their filing that they will lay out everything that Manafort has lied about.
And as you said, Rick, on top of that, former FBI Director James Comey will be up on Capitol Hill for one last hurrah with Republicans.
Yeah, and it's an interesting split screen because Comey, we know, has had lots of stories to tell. He's been negotiating to try to get this information out as publicly as possible. His decision to comply with the subpoena, to talk to House Republicans as they look to reach into the past. Of course, what they're interested in around James Comey is the handling of the Clinton investigation, not the things around Trump. So maybe a little bit of a smokescreen. We'll see how it develops. Something tells me that Mueller has the opportunity to speak a little more loudly than even Comey or any of the Republicans hearing him tomorrow just through these court filings.
And so a lot to chew on tomorrow. The Mueller investigation. We'll have it for you right here in the briefing room at 3:30 Eastern Time. Meanwhile, Congress trying to wrap up some business before they transition to the new Congress in January. And guys, one of the biggest things, obviously, is funding the government through the end of the year into 2019. They officially bought themselves some time today, the Senate approving a short-term fix. But they still have the sticking point of the wall. Rick, it's going to be pretty epic on Tuesday when the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, head to the White House to meet with President Trump without any Republicans. It's just going to be the Dems and him.
Chuck and Nancy, they're friends again. And critically, Nancy Pelosi, the presumed next House Speaker when the Democrats take control in January, is saying that she does not want to see DACA recipients tied in any way, the so-called Dreamers' fate tied in any way to wall funding. She says those are separate issues. Well, that's a big line in the sand for her to draw right now because the president has made clear that he thinks there's a deal to be had that brings them both in. He believes he was close to a deal with Chuck Schumer on the Senate Democratic side before. Nancy Pelosi is now saying, look, that is not how we're going into this. So if all they're talking now is wall funding, you can't imagine Democrats giving a lot of help to Republicans now, and they're going to be in a stronger position come January.
And let's listen to Nancy Pelosi. She held a press conference today before leaving town for the weekend. Here's what she had to say about that possible deal.
They're two different subjects. What we want in this negotiation, I think what I can say, and wouldn't be a surprise to anybody, is we'd like to just go in and say, it's December. The time we've lost now another week, I mean, for a legitimate purpose, but nonetheless, we're getting closer to when this CR expires, and of course we're extending it for 2 weeks, and in that 2 weeks we have to, within that 2 weeks, I wouldn't even say the latest possible day, but within that 2 weeks we have before us all of the factors, all of the issues that we need to make a decision.
Comes down to how much will President Trump accept for his wall. Democrats want to give him as little as possible. White House wants $5 billion. Where is that sweet spot going to be? White House didn't. I talked to some officials last night. They don't seem to be preparing for a shutdown.
No, they're not. Same with officials that I've spoken to have said the same. The ball's really in the president's court now, and even Republicans who we've been talking to up on the Hill say the same. You know, this is really between the president and Chuck Schumer, and now Chuck and Nancy. So we'll see what comes out of that meeting.
Tuesday will be epic.
Tuesday will be epic.
Any other negotiations going on around this one? We'll have it for you right here in the briefing room. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to end today with another look back at some of the images and sounds of this poignant moments of the day here as the country continues to remember George Herbert Walker Bush. And we'll leave you with that from some of the ceremonies today down in Texas. We'll see you tomorrow.
I think he's funny. He's straightforward. He's all business when we're working. Doesn't beat around the bush a lot. Doesn't take a long time to make a decision. And he's interested in results.
George Bush isn't just a president who promoted the ethic of service long before it was fashionable. He's a citizen whose life has embodied that ethic.
And I want to thank my dad, the most decent man I have ever known. All my life, I have been amazed that a gentle soul could be so strong. Dad, I am proud to be your son.